This is going to be our third video on section 2.4, postulates and reading diagrams. So the postulates that we talked about, postulates 1 through 11, they're going to give you some diagrams that illustrate one of the postulates, and you have to say which postulate it is. So if this happens, then this happens. If this happens, then this happens. So we'll do these first two together. If two lines cross, then they cross at a point. Which postulate is that? That's postulate 7. If two lines cross, then they cross at a point. Here's two planes. They're crossing as well. What is their intersection? If two planes intersect, then they intersect at a line. That's postulate 11. So on your assignment, you're going to see similar things where they give you two diagrams, just like I drew out on the last video. You have to say which postulate it is. Okay, here's a diagram, lots of points, lines, segments, rays, all on that plane. These are things that you're allowed to assume when you're looking at a diagram. All the points shown are coplanar. So notice all of these points here. And notice how it appears that they're all on this orangish plane. You're allowed to assume that if you see them on that plane, that they are on that plane. You're also allowed to assume that two angles are a linear pair. For example, angle AHB and angle BHD, these two angles right here make this line. You're allowed to assume that if two angles look like they make a line, that they do. You can also assume from a diagram that you have vertical angles. So here's angle AHF. Here's angle BHD. These angles are vertical. It appears that they are in the diagram. You are allowed to assume that. You can also assume that points are collinear if they're connected. Point A, point H, point J, and point D are collinear. There's a line that goes through them. You can also assume that line AD and line BF intersect at point H. That's what the diagram is showing. It looks like they intersect at H, so you're allowed to assume that. Now, there's also some things that you're not allowed to assume. What you don't want to do is assume that 3 points are collinear because they look like it. You can only assume they're collinear if they're connected. Okay, so saying that these 3 points, G, F, and E, are collinear would be a mistake. Also, line BF and line CE, it doesn't look like they intersect. You can't assume that they don't intersect, and you can't assume that they do intersect. If it's not showing them intersecting, don't assume one way or the other. We're going to show you some marks that will indicate if they don't touch. Don't assume that two angles are congruent just because they look like it. Here's angle BAJ, and here's angle CJA. They kind of look like they're the same size, the same measure. They're both acute, they're almost right angles. Do not assume that they're congruent. Likewise, don't assume that an angle is 90 degrees. We've talked about this for a while now. So don't assume that this line AD and this line BF are perpendicular. That's what this means. Don't assume that this angle is 90. Let's sketch a diagram that shows line TV intersecting segment PQ at point W. Also, segment TW is congruent to segment WV. The best thing to do on these is to just draw it as you go And you can adjust as you're drawing as well. So we need to draw a line, and it needs to be line TV. Your line doesn't have to look like this. It can go the other way. You can switch the T and the V. That's not important. But it needs to intersect segment PQ. So I'm just making a segment PQ. And it intersects it at point W. Also, you want to indicate that segment TW, that's this one, and segment WV, that's this one, are congruent. So I just kind of got lucky and drew this segment right through the middle of that segment TV. If I didn't, I would have to adjust my picture. But the point is, these need to be the same, and they kind of look the same, but you're not allowed to assume that. How do you show the two segments are the same? You put matching slash marks on them. So now we know segment TW is congruent to segment WV. That's what that looks like.